My fiancé returned from the battlefield not only defeated but also maimed, one leg gone, his brilliant future shattered. Obeying my family's order, I went to break off our engagement, only to see a line of words float before my eyes out of nowhere: foolish supporting female. This male lead is going to be a king of a different surname someday. If you humiliate him by breaking the engagement now, you'll end up disfigured, thrown into a beggar's den, and starved to death later. Such a perfect starting hand, and you're playing it to ruin. Scared out of my wits, I met Chi Chen's gloomy gaze, not daring to utter a single word about the engagement. Instead, I fussed over his well-being. I am the legitimate daughter of the Shen family. My father is a 7th-rank minor official in the imperial court. Aside from attending court on the 1st and 15th of every lunar month, he spends each day scheming to curry favor and climb the official ladder. As his biggest bargaining chip, he pulled out all the stops to secure me a splendid marriage to the legitimate son of General Qi, the current 2nd-rank military commander of the dynasty, my fiancé. To put it plainly, my father couldn't even see the back of General Qi's head at court. Yet thanks to this engagement, he could sling an arm around General Qi's shoulders and call him in-law after the court adjourned. But just yesterday, this perfect marriage took a catastrophic turn. News of General Qi's defeat spread back to the capital, and with it came word that General and Lady Qi had died in battle, and Chi Chen had lost a leg. In an instant, my father's world crumbled. Fearing being implicated by the Qi family, he ordered me to break off the engagement with Chi Chen as quickly as possible. A crippled invalid, still dreaming of marrying my daughter. Shoo shoo, don't grieve. Once this storm passes, father will find you an even better match. I wholeheartedly agreed with him. I had no desire to marry a cripple, so early the next morning, I set off with the steward. Out of guilt, I told him to bring some nourishing medicinal herbs. When we reached the Qi mansion, the steward answered the door dressed in white. Walking through the estate, the once grand mansion lay desolate and empty. Though there were still servants about, the air reeked of ruin and decline. I was hurrying to get the deed done and return home in time for lunch when, in the next second, those strange words floated before my eyes again: foolish supporting female. Break the engagement now, and you'll never get a chance to cling to his power later. This male lead will be the only king of a different surname in the dynasty. Humiliate him today, and you'll be disfigured and starved to death in a beggar's den tomorrow. Such a perfect start, and you're throwing it all away. What an idiot. I froze, petrified, still trying to make sense of the bizarre words. When I looked up and met a pair of gloomy eyes, Chi Chen sat under the eaves, clad in pure white mourning garments. His handsome face was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp beneath his skin, and his tightly pressed lips were pale and bloodless. His stare made my body go rigid as I heard him ask, "Miss Shen, why have you come?" A chill ran down my spine, the feeling of being stalked by a bird of prey, certain to have my neck snapped at any moment. Chi Chen sat in a specially crafted chair. Still reeling from the strange words I'd seen, I blurted out, "I've come to see you." "Oh, to see me? What for?" "To see if I've come to bring medicinal herbs." I cut him off, motioning for the steward to bring forward the herbs we'd brought, pointing at the crates of medicinal herbs on the ground. I forced a smile and said to Chi Chen, "I heard you were injured. I don't know if these will help, but please use them. I have matters to attend to at home, so I won't stay long. I'll come to see you another day. You, eat well, and take care of yourself." With that, I turned and fled, daring not to linger a moment longer. Too, I thought I must have seen a ghost. After returning from the Qi mansion, I cautiously asked everyone who'd been with me that day, but no one except me had seen those words. The strange writing had only appeared that once at the Qi mansion, and for the next few days, it was gone without a trace, leaving me utterly distraught. But it's better to believe in the impossible than to risk it. The meaning behind those words was truly terrifying. Perhaps, just like in the storybooks, this was a fortune bestowed upon me by heaven. I didn't hesitate. That night, I went to find my father and told him I refused to break off the engagement. When he asked why, I said I loved Chi Chen. In short, "Father, I will marry no one but Chi Chen." And with that, I was locked in the ancestral hall. My father stood outside the door and roared, How could someone as wise and mighty as me give birth to such a muddle-headed fool? Reflect on your actions in there, steward. No food for her for 3 days. As if I'd be foolish enough to starve for 3 days. That second night, I escaped. I climbed out of the ancestral hall's window, then scaled the wall to flee the Shen mansion. Once outside, I headed straight for the Qi mansion. When the Qi steward led me to Qi Chen, I was so dizzy with hunger I could barely stand. And I collapsed straight into his arms. When I woke again, it was noon the next day. Qi Chen sat by my bed. Seeing me open my eyes, he asked in a puzzled tone, "The doctor said you fainted from hunger. What happened?" A young maid stood nearby holding a plate of pastries. I grabbed them and shoveled them into my mouth. After a few bites, I finally felt alive again. I wiped my mouth, grabbed Qi Chen's sleeve with red eyes, and hung my head, looking as if I could barely bring myself to speak. Father said he wanted to break off our engagement. I refused, so he locked me in the ancestral hall and wouldn't give me any food. Qi Chen froze, his hand on his knee trembling slightly. You refused to break it off. Why? Given the current situation, breaking the engagement is the best choice. The general's mansion has fallen. Your father is doing this for your own good. Listening, I stole a glance at him. Though his words were calm, the malice in his eyes was almost overflowing. I hung my head again and continued speaking in a pitiful voice. No, I don't think so. We pledged our troth to each other, and we should share weal and woe. I will never agree to break the engagement. Qi Chen fell silent for a long time, then tossed out a faint sentence, "Rest well," and with that, he left. I immediately told the maid to prepare a table of hot food for me. I took up residence at the Qi mansion. During this time, Qi Chen brought me news from home. Uncle Shen has been visiting Minister Song's mansion frequently these days. They've grown quite close. I knew exactly what was going on. He intends to form an alliance with the Song family through marriage. My concubine sister has been registered under my mother's name since birth. And she's about the same age as Minister Song's legitimate son. Qi Chen looked at me, saying nothing. I walked over and sat beside him, grabbing his sleeve and saying, "Qi Chen, father has abandoned me. I only have you now." Qi Chen didn't move. He sat in silence, his face still cold. But I knew, given his current state, his failure to reject me was a tacit agreement. In the days that followed, I accompanied Qi Chen in his treatment for his leg. The process was agonizing. Qi Chen grew more and more irritable and unpredictable. Famous doctors and physicians were summoned from all corners of the realm, and he chased them all away with curses. Of the 10 doctors who came, 9 said Qi Chen's leg was incurable. The last one, not wanting to be cursed, gave a vague answer, saying it was up to fate. Qi Chen drove away all the doctors, sitting alone in his room with his head hanging and his hair loose, looking like a madman. I pushed open the door, carrying his medicine, and pressed the bowl into his hand. Meeting his bloodshot eyes, I said to him word by word, "There are countless doctors in the world. We'll see them one by one. If these won't do, we'll see the next batch. We will find the right one. I promise. Qi Chen, don't give up." I held his wrist tightly. He took a deep breath, tilted his head back, and downed the medicine in one gulp. I had more faith in Qi Chen's leg healing than he did himself. This man was going to be the only king of a different surname in the Daong dynasty. A mere leg injury was nothing to him, and sure enough, on an ordinary afternoon, an old man with a white beard knocked on the general's mansion's door, claiming he could cure Qi Chen's leg. Half a month later, Qi Chen stood up again. The moment he rose to his feet, I burst into tears of joy. No one knew how happy I was. Qi Chen took a handkerchief and gently wiped away my tears, his movements infinitely tender. I snatched the handkerchief from his hand, let out a fierce huff, and thought, to hell with the beggar's den. Whoever wants to live there can. I sure as hell won't. 3. Once Qi Chen's leg had fully healed, he told me he was leaving for the border to return to the battlefield, and that I should wait for him at the mansion. In my heart, "Shoo shoo, you have long been my wife. When I win the battle and earn military merit, I will marry you in the most glorious way possible." I had no doubt about his words. "Very well. Go in peace. I will wait here for your triumphant return." Qi Chen smiled and ruffled my hair. Just then, the familiar floating words appeared before my eyes again. TSK, thought the supporting female had finally wised up, but turns out she's still just as stupid. Sure enough, a supporting female is always a supporting female no matter how hard she tries. She can never be the female lead, just stay in the capital and wait. Our male lead is off to the battlefield to meet his true fated lady. I snapped my mouth shut in shock, threw my arms around Chi Chen's arm, and said, "I'm going with you." Chi Chen smiled and explained patiently, "The battlefield is dangerous. Moreover, I am returning to atone for my crimes, so the conditions will be even harsher. I cannot bear to see you suffer. Just wait for me at the mansion in peace. Shoo shoo, I'm not afraid of suffering, I just want to be by your side." I sniffled and started crying. Auntie Chi could accompany Uncle Chi to the battlefield, and I can too. I refuse to stay in the mansion in the dark, not knowing your news, living in constant worry and anxiety every single day. These words clearly struck a chord with Chi Chen. He sighed, pulled me into his arms, and nodded, agreeing to take me with him. Before I could even rejoice, however, Chi Chen had me dressed in a common soldier's armor, and I joined the marching army with him. We traveled out of the capital, the generals and officers at the front rode horses, while the soldiers at the back marched on foot. Chi Chen held no official position now. With General Chi gone, he could only enlist as a common soldier. Fortunately, many of General Chi's old subordinates were willing to follow him. They only awaited a victory, and he would rise through the ranks in an instant. But that didn't change the fact that Chi Chen and I would have to walk all the way to Muching on the border. Once we left the capital, Chi Chen said he would carry me on his back. Thinking of the long journey ahead, I refused his offer. Later, I truly couldn't walk another step, and he hauled me onto his back without a word of protest. After that, he somehow procured a horse, and rode with me on its back. Me in his arms, we jostled and swayed all the way, and finally reached Muching at dusk. Ordinary soldiers had to train at dawn. And I slogged through the drills for more than 10 days before the barbarians launched an attack. Chi Chen led his father's old troops to claim the first merit of the battle, earning a promotion and a tent of his own, and I naturally became his lieutenant by his side. From then on, I no longer had to endure the dawn drills. I slept until I woke naturally, and hot food was waiting for me the moment I got up. When my belly was full, I wandered the city streets. Substituted for Master Liu at the schoolhouse, and helped Aunt Shu the vegetable seller with her accounts. Life was full and content. With every battle won, Chi Chen's rank climbed higher and higher. Before long, I no longer had to disguise myself in men's clothes, and could show my true face to the world. I'd thought that coming to the battlefield with him would let me experience heart-stirring moments like facing life and death side by side with Chi Chen, taking a blade or a sword for him to earn his eternal gratitude. But none of that happened. The army held the barbarians at bay so tightly that even in Muching, the city closest to the front lines, the common people lived in perfect peace. As time passed, I even took over as the formal teacher at the schoolhouse. Master Liu was far too old, having taught students all his life, and could no longer get out of bed. In Muching, men of learning were few and far between. And Master Liu had been the only one. Whatever else one might say about my father, he'd hired all manner of tutors for me since I was a child. I was proficient in playing the qin, chess, calligraphy and painting, more than qualified for the teacher's post. That day, after dinner, Chi Chen held me in the courtyard to watch the stars. The sky over the border was truly breathtakingly beautiful. "There's a martial arts tournament in the military camp tomorrow. Would you like to come watch?" Shoo shoo. I leaned against his chest, half asleep, and mumbled in a daze, "No, I have to teach the children tomorrow." Chi Chen nodded, lifted me up in his arms, and carried me back to my room. I burrowed under the quilt and rolled over, watching Chi Chen close the door and leave. I was just about to close my eyes when those familiar floating words appeared before me again. "You fool, teach the kids another day, you have to go watch Chi Chen fight." Tomorrow's tournament is the first meeting between the male and female leads. They're the last two standing, and they fight like crazy. Sparks fly, and they fall for each other hook, line, and sinker. Wah, so childhood sweethearts really can't compete with fate's chosen one. No matter how deep the love, it can't beat destiny. My heart is broken. Men are all just pigs after all. I snapped awake in an instant. A martial arts tournament. I'm definitely going. 4. The next day. The sky was clear and cloudless. I arrived at the military camp, and Chi Chen's aide-de-camp eagerly led me toward the training ground. Before I even drew near, I heard a deafening roar of cheers and shouts. As I walked over, everyone I met stepped aside to make way for me. Master Shen's here. Perfect timing. General Chi the Younger is fighting right now. Hurry to the front and watch. It's incredible. Master Shen, come quick. There's a spot here. I walked over and stood my ground, looking up at the ring, and saw two figures locked in a fierce, inextricable fight. One was Chi Chen. The other was a young soldier, delicate and handsome of feature, clad in tight martial attire. Every kick and punch brimmed with unrestrained vitality. If it weren't for the warning of those strange words, I would never have guessed she was a woman too. Chi Chen and she fought tooth and nail, each pinning the other only to be countered in an instant. It was a sparring match of unparalleled brilliance. I did not miss the bright light in Chi Chen's eyes as he looked at her, a spark I had never seen in them before. A heavy weight settled in my chest, and I left before the match ended. Once outside, I wandered aimlessly, not knowing where to go. I sat down by the river, staring blankly at the water in the distance. My mind was a mess, no clear reason why, just a jumble of chaos. Suddenly, a loud splash rang out. Someone had jumped into the river. The tree I sat under hid me from view, and the person did not notice me. I froze, momentarily at a loss, then watched as she unfastened her clothes, revealing a fair shoulder and a gently heaving chest. I immediately realized who she was. I let out a quiet breath of relief, and hesitated, unsure if I should make my presence known. I was about to slip away quietly when footsteps sounded from behind me. A group of soldiers walked toward the river, slinging their arms around each other and laughing. The person in the water panicked too. If the soldiers came over, she would have no time to escape. She would be seen in all her nakedness, and the secret she had hidden for so long would be laid bare for the whole world to see. I watched her face drain of all color, then stood up and stepped out from behind the tree. Master Shen, you're here. General Chi was just looking for you. I stood blocking the path, and smiled. I felt a bit stifled, so I came here for some fresh air. Seeing I had no intention of moving, the men exchanged glances, shot each other a look, and said, "Well, we won't disturb Master Shen then." They turned and left. The person in the water quickly dressed and climbed ashore. She touched her head awkwardly, her cheeks flushed, and introduced herself first. Thank you so much, Miss Shen. I'm Xia Sheng, from the cavalry battalion." I nodded. Xia Sheng had thrown on her clothes in such a hurry that they were soaked through, hardly the time for a proper conversation. We exchanged a few polite words, then went our separate ways. By the time I headed back, my mood had lightened a great deal. I thought to myself, even if Chi Chen really did fall for someone else, it wouldn't matter all that much to me. I had refused to break off the engagement in the first place only because of those strange words. Afraid that I would really end up disfigured and starved to death in a beggar's den one day. With the bond Chi Chen and I shared now, even if we did break off the engagement, I could walk away unscathed. Halfway back, I ran into Chi Chen, who had come looking for me. At the sight of me, he let out a visible breath of relief, walked over, and took my hand in his. "Song," he said, "you came to the training ground. Didn't you say you wouldn't come last night?" I swung our intertwined hands back and forth, and smiled. Naturally I wanted to come and witness the heroic bearing of General Chi in battle. Chi Chen raised an eyebrow, his eyes crinkling with laughter, clearly pleased with my words. "Then you came to the right place. Your general won first place, and earned a fine piece of hide for you." I nodded. "Then thank you, General. Just a verbal thank you won't do." On the way back, Chi Chen said he would be free the next evening, and asked me to accompany him to the lantern fair in the city that night. He didn't wait for my reply, saying it was my reward and that I couldn't refuse. I didn't tell him, either, that the schoolhouse was closed the next day. I was free not just that evening, but the whole day long. A reward is a reward, I suppose. 5. A few days after that encounter with Xia Sheng by the river, she came to visit me with a small gift, saying she wanted to thank me properly. Before she left, Xie Sheng asked me, a little embarrassed, to keep her secret for her. I nodded and agreed. I'd experienced life in the military camp when I first arrived. It was bitter and tiring, an utter struggle. Xie Sheng had not only survived there, but also earned a great deal of military merit. To be honest, I admired her for it. And perhaps with that secret between us, Xie Sheng and I grew closer. She would bring me all sorts of curious little trinkets she'd somehow come by. And I would often send her nourishing soups to build up her strength. Xie Sheng's martial arts skills were among the best in the camp, but she was far too thin. Take that day I saw her jumping into the river for a cold bath. For example, doing that for a long time would only harm her body. Little by little, we became good friends. I never would have expected it. That day, I was on my way back to the courtyard after delivering soup to Xie Sheng, when I ran straight into Qi Chen at the gate. He didn't say a word at first, just stared at me, his lips pressed into a thin line. I was a little confused, and spoke first. "Why are you standing at the gate instead of going in?" Qi Chen suddenly reached out and pulled me tightly into his arms, burying his face in the crook of my neck. His voice was muffled as he spoke. "In half a month, the army will march on the barbarians' main camp. When I win the battle and claim the first merit, we'll return to the capital. Then, we can get married." I nodded, non-committal. "Your safety comes first in everything." Qi Chen seemed to have more to say, but we walked into the courtyard in silence, and he gently let me go, turned, and walked straight into the kitchen without uttering another word. I blinked, glanced toward the kitchen, then went to dig up the fruit wine I'd buried under the tree. I'd learned to brew it from Aunt Chen next door, whose wine was famous all over Muqing. I'd followed her recipe, and I thought mine couldn't be half bad. There were 2 jars in total, one for Qi Chen and me to drink together, and the other to send to Xie Sheng. Perfect. When news of the great battle spread, the people of Muqing began gathering vegetables from their fields and pigs from their sties, sending them all to the military camp. Many had sons or husbands serving in the army. Only the old, the weak, women and children remained at home. Every time a great battle loomed, the camp bustled with activity. I passed countless scenes of families bidding tearful farewells on my way, but when I reached Xie Sheng's quarters, it was quiet and still. She was polishing her spear, her expression no different from usual. I called out to her from outside, and she looked up, surprised to see me. "Shu Shu, what are you doing here?" I held up the bundle of clothes in my arm. "The march will take half a month, and the weather's turning cold. You need to wear something thicker." Xie Sheng froze, then took the cotton-padded coat from my hands with both of hers. I walked in on my own, pulled out a small cloth bag, and took out a silk ribbon from inside. "That cloth you use to bind your chest is hard and stuffy. I traded this from Aunt Chen. You'll be much more comfortable with this from now on." Xie Sheng stood there, flustered and at a loss. I set the things down for her, and didn't stay long. As I left, I said to her, "Blades and swords have no eyes on the battlefield. Military merit is important, but your safety comes first in everything. I'll wait for you to come back, and we'll drink the wine together then." Xie Sheng's eyes turned red, and she nodded heavily. It was many years later that Xie Sheng finally told me a little about her background. She'd been born into an ordinary peasant family. Her mother had given birth to 3 daughters before finally having a son, and to feed the boy, she and her 2 elder sisters had been sold off to different places. Xie Sheng had been sold to a brothel. She'd just turned 15 then, and had run away tooth and nail. She'd grabbed a pair of scissors, cut her hair, smudged her face with ash, and fled into the military camp. Life in the military camp struck me as bitter and toilsome. Yet Xie Sheng said it was good. This was the only place she could truly live, for she had no way back. Fortunately, she had persevered, fighting with her life to carve out a path for herself. We returned to the capital in spring. The war had ended in winter, and the harsh cold made marching impossible, so we had spent the winter in Muqing. Qi Chen had been wounded in battle, and I made him lie in bed to recuperate, hounding him to take his medicine every single day. Notably, Qi Chen and Xie Sheng had faced life and death side by side on the battlefield. Xie Sheng had taken an arrow for him, an assassin's arrow aimed straight for his heart. Without her sacrifice, Qi Chen would have surely met his end. As Qi Chen spoke, He held me tightly in his arms, and I could feel him trembling with fear. I wrapped my arms around him too, pulling him close. Shoo shoo. In that moment, I thought I'd never see you again. After we captured the barbarian Khan, I asked Xia Sheng why she'd taken the arrow for me. She said she was afraid if I died, you'd grieve endlessly that she'd done it for you, no matter the reason. I, Qi Chen, owe her my life. I must live well, if only to not betray that sacrifice. What on earth was he going on about, and why was he eyeing me like I was a thief out to steal something? I pushed his head away with a huff. I'm going to send medicine to Xia Sheng. You stay in bed and heal properly. Once the weather warmed, our return to the capital was finally set in motion. Qi Chen had won a great victory this time, capturing the barbarian Khan alive and expanding the borders of Daong, something even his father had never accomplished. When the army entered the capital, the crown prince led all the officials to greet us at the city gate, and the common people lined the streets, cheering our return. Qi Chen went into the palace, and I returned to the Qi mansion. I had barely sat down when the steward hurried in to report that my father had arrived. When I saw him, his face was flushed with joy, and he could barely close his mouth from smiling. The moment I stepped through the door, he strode over in a few quick steps, grabbed my hands, and rambled on and on. Truly my daughter, you knew Qi Chen would rise again. You're our family's greatest hero now. I wrenched my hands free with force. Father, hurry and prepare my dowry. I'm eager to marry, and it can't be shabby. If it is, people will say our family is just climbing the social ladder. Nonsense, climbing the ladder. My daughter stood by Qi Chen even when he was a cripple, never leaving his side. Where will he find a woman as good as you? It's his fortune to marry you. I bit back my frustration, forcing a smile to my face. In any case, Qi Chen has been promoted to a high rank now. Our family can't afford to look too shabby, or people will laugh at us. You figure it out yourself. Watching my father's retreating back, my mind wandered to many things, like the words I'd seen floating before my eyes, saying I'd incur Qi Chen's hatred by breaking the engagement, leading to my disfigurement and death by starvation in a beggar's den. If that had really happened, what would my family have been doing then? No matter how vengeful Qi Chen was, he wouldn't have gone out of his way to stop my father from slipping me a steamed bun or a dumpling in the beggar's den, would he? How could I have starved to death? And then there was the fact that I'd followed Qi Chen to the border, with no word sent back for over a year. Now that I'd finally returned, my father's first words were all about this and that, never once asking if I was well, if I'd been hurt, if I'd suffered. Not a single question. I'd always known my father was opportunistic, but it was only at this moment that I truly felt the coldness of his heart. I didn't feel happy again until Qi Chen came back from the palace. He was overjoyed too. He reached out, lifted me into his arms in one swift motion, and spun me around the courtyard, laughing as he spoke. Shoo shoo, I've inherited my father's title. I also spoke to His Majesty about us. The imperial edict granting our marriage will come in a few days. I can finally marry you. We're going to be husband and wife. Dizzy from the spinning, I buried my face in his chest. I knew just how hard Qi Chen had fought for this moment of joy. Fortunately, after enduring the darkest days, the dawn had finally come. 7. Qi Chen had said the imperial edict would arrive in a few days, but more than 10 days passed, and there was not a single word from the palace. Qi Chen had already started taking his men to buy all the things we needed for the wedding, leaving the mansion every day with a spring in his step. I stayed cooped up in my room, embroidering my wedding dress. My concubine sister, who was already married, even took time out of her busy schedule to help me. As we chatted, I asked her how she was faring in her husband's home. She smiled complacently. Don't worry, Ajia, I'm doing very well. I felt relieved at that. Originally, my father had his eye on Minister Song's legitimate son for her, but my sister had fallen for the second son instead. I had run away by then, and father had only her to rely on, so he'd had no choice but to agree. Now it seemed she'd made the right choice. This sister of mine had always been extremely clever. In her own words, she could outmaneuver anyone. Embroidering a wedding dress was a time-consuming and exhausting task. I'd been at it for nearly half a month, and Qi Chen had practically transformed the entire mansion. The most obvious change was the red silk hung everywhere. Inside and out, every corner brimmed with joy and celebration. Yet strangely, the imperial edict granting our marriage was nowhere to be seen. One day, Xia Sheng invited me to burn incense at a temple outside the city. A temple where the bodhisattva worshipped was said to be extremely efficacious by word of mouth. When Xia Sheng returned to the capital, she had been rewarded for her meritorious service with an official position. Becoming a young general in her own right, she now served under Qi Chen. And if nothing else, they were a well-matched pair in official business, cooperating with perfect understanding. Qi Chen had mentioned to me over dinner one night that while in Muqing, he'd thought about transferring Xia Sheng to be his lieutenant. I'd had no idea about that. I'd only known that Xia Sheng had stayed in the cavalry battalion in Muqing, never serving as Qi Chen's lieutenant. I'd asked him about it then, and Qi Chen had said, when I sparred with him at the tournament. I admired his skills. I thought if I had such a fierce warrior under my command, would be able to return to the capital much sooner. But then I saw that brat always trying to curry favor with you. I could barely stand guard against him, let alone have him under my nose, getting in the way. At that moment, I'd been stunned, so that was why Qi Chen's eyes had lit up when he looked at Xia Sheng during the tournament. As I burned incense to the bodhisattva, I'd thought of 100 wishes to make. In the end, though, I only prayed for one thing, that Xia Sheng, Qi Chen, and I might all live safe and prosperous lives. I only hoped the bodhisattva wouldn't think me greedy for praying for 3 people's safety at once, and refused to grant my wish. On our way down the mountain, we encountered a dangerous incident. A band of bandits was chasing a carriage, driving it straight toward the edge of a cliff. Xia Sheng drew her sword at once and charged at the bandits. I led the remaining maids and guards to pull the carriage back, which was already teetering on the brink of the cliff. The carriage curtain fluttered open in the wind, revealing a richly dressed young lady sitting inside. She looked terrified, her hands clinging tightly to the carriage window, her face as pale as a sheet. Her red, swollen eyes were filled with the despair of facing death. My heart ached for her, and I comforted her. "Don't be afraid, I'll pull you up to safety." She nodded heavily at me, tears streaming down her face unceasingly. Fortunately, I had brought a large number of men with me, and slowly but surely, we pulled the carriage back from the edge of the cliff. Just then, words flitted across my vision in a blur. If the supporting female knew the person she saved is Princess Zhaohua, the one who'll steal her fiancé, she'd definitely regret it. Right? Do you really wonder why the imperial marriage edict is taking so long? It's because the emperor values Qi Chen and wants to marry the princess to him. Wah, Shen Shu and Qi Chen finally returned to the capital to get married. But out of nowhere comes a princess. The couple I ship is going to break up. I'm so heartbroken. I froze for a moment, but did not let go of the carriage. I hadn't known who she was a moment ago, but I did now. But so what? This was a living, breathing human life. In Muqing, life was above all else. By then, Xia Sheng had already defeated the bandits, and I had pulled the carriage safely back onto solid ground. 8. Xia Sheng and I helped the young lady out of the carriage together, and she stammered her thanks through her tears. Before long, a troop of mounted guards galloped down the mountain path. The leading general knelt before the young lady. "Your servant has come late to rescue your highness. Please forgive me, princess." Princess Zhaohua was soon escorted away by her retinue. On the way back to the city, Xia Sheng took my hand and spoke to me at great length. One sentence in particular left me stunned. She said she wanted to marry me. I clapped a hand over my mouth, looking from her to myself, the unspoken question plain in my eyes. Sheng, we're both women. What nonsense are you talking about?" Xia Sheng's face turned red, and she waved her hands in fluster. "It's not what you think. What I mean is, if you ever need it, I can protect you. That lady just now is Princess Zhaohua. At the last palace banquet, His Majesty hinted at marrying her to Qi Chen. He refused, of course, but His Majesty clearly hasn't given up on the idea. We can't question the imperial family's decisions, but one thing is certain: if Qi Chen betrays you, I'll take you in. I have an official position now, and a mansion of my own. It might not be as comfortable as the Qi mansion, but I'll do everything in my power to make you live a good life." I looked at her, my heart a jumble of emotions, as if something warm and soft was swelling up in my chest, filling it to the brim. I hadn't had a chance to speak when the familiar floating words flitted across my vision again. Though they were just words, I could almost feel their excitement. This is totally an option. The two of them, I've wanted to say this for so long. They're so sweet together. The words that followed grew increasingly bold, some replaced by symbols, making them barely legible. I chose to ignore them, first thanking Xia Sheng for her kind offer. I thought to myself, if it ever came to that, this would be a fine way out. I had always been a woman who knew how to plan for herself, but what happened next was completely unexpected. The day after we returned, Princess Zhaohua arrived at the Qi mansion with a large retinue of palace maids and eunuchs, making a great fanfare. She brought me many bolts of luxurious silk and exquisite jewelry, and with her, she also brought the imperial edict granting our marriage. After I returned to the palace, I found out who you were from the palace servants, so I begged father for this imperial marriage edict, she said. The princess took my hand affectionately, handed the edict to Qi Chen, and looked at him with her chin raised, her eyes sharp. Miss Shen is my savior. If you dare to treat her badly, I'll ask father to demote you to the bitter cold lands and never let you return. I listened, torn between laughter and tears. Who could have imagined things would take such a turn? The princess left in high spirits, saying she would attend my wedding feast and even escort me to the bridal sedan chair. I nodded and agreed. After so many twists and turns, Qi Chen and I finally set our wedding date for the 3rd month of the following year, but in the middle of the 2nd month of the new year, an urgent message arrived from the border. The new Khan of the barbarians had allied with the Shimeng tribe to the north, gathering 100,000 troops and marching straight for Mucheng. The barbarians sent envoys to the capital, demanding that Daong return the cities it had seized and send a princess to form a marriage alliance. If not, their massive army would invade. The two sides had just fought a brutal war, both suffering heavy losses. Logically, they should have rested and recuperated, but the barbarians and Shimeng had chosen to ally instead. Qi Chen began leaving early and returning late every day. A few days later, he came back with news. Most of the court ministers were in favor of the marriage alliance and returning the cities. Qi Chen was furious. And I had seen with my own eyes how hard-won that previous victory had been. It was no exaggeration to say it had been forged with the blood and flesh of countless soldiers. Yet now, they were not only to return the conquered lands, but also send a princess away, and in the entire imperial family, Princess Zhaohua was the only princess of marriageable age. A few days later, a palace eunuch arrived with a message. Princess Zhaohua had invited me out for an outing. Since I had saved her from the bandits that day, she and I had gradually become good friends. As fellow women, she often invited me to gatherings, but this time, the atmosphere was far from the usual ease and joy. 9. She and I went to a hillside on the outskirts of the city, a place with breathtaking scenery, a hidden gem we had stumbled upon by chance. Sitting on the grass spread with a brocade mat, Zhaohua raised her wine cup to me with a smile, then tilted her head back and drained it in one gulp. She stared at the capital city not far below the mountain, twitching the corner of her mouth. I may never see a view like this again. She could not have been kept in the dark about the court's news. Her cheeks flushed with wine, she leaned over and hugged me tightly. As a princess, I accepted my destiny a long time ago. I knew this day would come sooner or later. To trade my one life for 100 years of peace for Daong, to spare the people from the suffering of war, it is well worth it. She buried her face in my chest, her voice muffled. It's a pity I won't be able to escort you to your wedding. I promised I would, but now I have to break my word. I squeezed my eyes shut tight, afraid tears would spill out. That night, back at the mansion, I took Qi Chen's hand and asked him, if we go to war, what are our chances of winning? Qi Chen did not question why I asked. He sat down with me in his arms and replied earnestly, 60%, if I am the commander-in-chief. And Xia Sheng is my lieutenant, it can rise to 80%. Before I could feel happy, he added, His Majesty is old, and the civil officials have scared him out of his wits with their talk. He refuses to send troops. How can this be? Was the marriage alliance the only option? I had saved Zhaohua's life with my own hands. Fight them. Those barbarians have always been wolf-hearted and ambitious. They've wanted to conquer us from the start. The marriage alliance and returning the cities are just stalling tactics. My girl, don't be foolish. If Princess Zhaohua is sent there, she'll only be tortured to death by those savages. I stared at the words only I could see, my heart thundering in my ears. I grabbed Qi Chen's arm, revealing for the first time in front of him the side I had long hidden away. I said, Qi Chen, the Crown Prince has come of age, His Majesty is old and ailing. And the Crown Prince has always supported sending troops. This news had come from my sister, now the Minister Song's wife. Her husband was a loyal supporter of the Crown Prince. That night, I did not sleep a wink, waiting for Qi Chen to return from the mansion all night long, until the first light of dawn. Qi Chen finally came back and brought good news with him. Soon after, the emperor fell gravely ill, and the Crown Prince took over as regent. He had several of the officials who opposed the war dragged out and beheaded in front of everyone, and from that day on, no one dared to voice any objections. Qi Chen was named the Grand General of the realm, and led the imperial army to march forth to battle. On the day of their departure, Zhaohua and I stood together on the city wall and watched them leave. The war raged on for a long time. At one point, the army ran short of food and supplies. Zhaohua took up a sword and visited the mansions of many powerful nobles, pressing the blade to their necks and forcing them to donate money. I followed close behind her, leading a retinue of palace servants carrying large crates to collect the gold, silver, and jewels the ministers brought out. 2 more winters passed, and then good news arrived from the border. The army had won a great victory. On the day of my wedding to Qi Chen, the feast was an uproar of joy and celebration. Zhaohua and Xie Sheng escorted me to the bridal sedan chair together. Xie Sheng had reclaimed her identity as a woman, and she was now the only female general in the entire dynasty. A year after our marriage, I gave birth to a daughter. Both Xie Sheng and Zhaohua wanted to be her godmother. The two argued until their faces turned red, and I pulled them apart, saying they could both be the child's godmothers. Xie Sheng, relying on her martial arts skills, snatched the baby into her arms and began to tease her. Zhaohua chased after her, shouting curses playfully. I shook my head with a smile, then saw Qi Chen wink at me. Together, we slipped away from the crowd, seeking a moment of peace and quiet elsewhere.